Good evening, Grace America. I'm Hugh, as promised all day. Hour number 3 starts off with former Secretary of State, former Director of the Central Intelligence Agency, former member of the United States Congress, former West Point graduate. I guess he's not a former West Point graduate. Always once a West Point graduate. Secretary Mike Pompeo. Mr. Secretary, good to see you again. Are you a little bit worried about the Army-Navy game this year? Because Navy looks pretty strong.
Navy looks good. That's usually a good sign for the game, though. We've looked strong in years, and we've gotten crushed by them. So, you got to be strong to be an Army football fan. I'm ready for anything.
All right. Let's get to the serious stuff. We learned today that there are going to be home and away meetings between President Trump and General Secretary Xi, with President Trump going to China in April. Date yet to be determined by General Secretary Xi coming here. What do you make of that news? Does it give you any angst?
Oh, goodness. I have no trouble with the meetings. I think having a conversation with him is fine. But we can't walk away from the central thesis, Hugh. In the first Trump administration, we made very clear. Chinese Communist Party under Xi Jinping is an adversary of the United States of America. Xi Jinping's global intentions for hegemony are real. His efforts in the Pacific, right? We can see this. We see how he responded to just a mere statement by the Japanese prime minister. I don't think Xi Jinping has changed one lick from Trump 1. And so if President Trump chooses to meet with him to try and convince him to see the world our way, I'm fine with that. But we can't sell him stuff from America that could put American soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines at risk. And we need to be ever mindful that Xi Jinping wants us to live in a world that looks more like his than ours, and that is just unacceptable.
Now, we have a new prime minister of Japan, and you just referenced that she said very strong things. I believe they are adding assets to their islands closest to China, even as we speak. What do you make of her position, and what do you make of China's reaction to it?
Look, I think she's got it right, for sure. There's no taking of Taiwan without Japan having an enormous security risk. Indeed, when there's ever a threat or a conflict, Japan will be drawn into it immediately. It's just geography. You can look at a map and say the planes fly here, they're going to be in Japanese airspace immediately. And so I thought her statements were perfect. They were clear. They weren't threatening to the Chinese Communist Party. They stated her fundamental view, which is Donald Trump's view of America. She's putting Japan first. She's going to protect Japanese sovereignty. And the Chinese reaction was, as it always is at Taiwan, over the top, wolf warrior diplomacy. And frankly, I think the whole world stares at it and says, come on, guys, don't be silly. This was a diplomatic statement by a prime minister of Japan. And for you all to respond in the way you did demonstrates you're concerned about your own internal political stability, I think. The fact that you don't actually speak for the Chinese people directly. And I think also reminds us all Xi Jinping's determination to capture politically Taiwan and our necessary resolve to prevent that from ever coming to be.
The wolf warrior diplomacy, I wonder at what point it becomes cry wolf diplomacy, because we're all so used to it, and that might not be a good thing. Let me raise with you one name, Jimmy Lai. I've asked Secretary of State Rubio, I've asked the president about it. They both have assured me he's on the agenda, but his name doesn't come up. What do you think about that, Mr. Secretary?
Well, I understand that it may well have been raised quietly with them. I'm fine with raising it quietly. We know Jimmy Lai. I had the incredible honor to meet with him when I was Secretary of State in my office in Foggy Bottom. This was just a man who was doing his level best to create a media outlet that spoke freely about the conditions in Hong Kong and in Greater China, and for that he's been imprisoned. Jimmy Lai should be released immediately by the Chinese Communist Party. He's being held on bogus charges. I hope President Trump and Secretary Rubio and all of the folks, our ambassador there in China, I hope they're all speaking to the Chinese government about this directly, forcefully, and making this stated with moral clarity that Jimmy Lai needs to be released immediately.
Now, would it make Xi look weaker or stronger to do that, Mr. Secretary? Because I've always thought when regimes release political prisoners, they look stronger, not weaker, but I'm not sure that Xi sees it that way.
Yeah, I don't think he does either. Hugh and I, we think about the world differently. I agree with you. From a Western perspective, that would demonstrate strength, not weakness. But I think internally, their leadership says, look, we don't want him out there. We can't have Jimmy Lai out there rolling around telling the truth about what's taking place here in China, about the virus that came out of the lab in Wuhan and all the other things. The denial of basic freedoms and property rights in Hong Kong is tragic for the people of Hong Kong. Jimmy Lai just simply spoke those truths, and for that, they need to try and silence him, and that's what they've done. And I think Jimmy Lai also sends a message to others who might be speaking out about the terrible conditions in China. And I think putting him in prison from Xi Jinping's perspective, tells other Chinese who might just follow in his footsteps, don't you dare do it. I'll put you in jail too.
All right, let me move to the second leg of the alliance of tyrants, Russia. There's been so much reporting on the talks between Secretary Rubio, Special Envoy Witkoff, various Ukrainian representatives, various names in the Russian media. How do you understand what's going on? And obviously, people talk to you that don't talk to me, but I'm just confused as to what's going on.
Hugh, I'm a bit confused too. Let me try and actually bridge these just a little bit. We shouldn't forget that there's 10,000 plus North Koreans fighting, killing Ukrainian kids today. That's at the direction of Xi Jinping. And so when you're meeting with Xi Jinping, you are meeting with an ally of Vladimir Putin. Make no mistake about it. As for these conversations, I think there are deep divides inside the Trump administration about what would be acceptable to the United States in terms of the outcome. I think there's been a bias towards Russia in the sense of saying, look, only the Ukrainians have agreed to a peace settlement. Now we have to do something that the Russians will actually agree to. The latest reporting from today says that the Ukrainians now believe they have a strong security guarantee. It is that very strong security guarantee that I suspect will convince Vladimir Putin he can't take this deal or won't take this deal. Putin hasn't agreed to a single Trump plan yet. Zelensky agreed to a ceasefire. You'll remember that, Hugh. Zelensky agreed to a previous version of a deal. Now Zelensky has said, yep, here's a plan that's acceptable to the Americans, and Putin has rejected them 1, 2, 3 seriatim. And then in Anchorage did the same. So I'm not optimistic that Putin and Lavrov, his henchmen, will sign up for anything that the Ukrainians are willing, or even for that matter, able to accept.
If this falls apart, and I think it will fall apart because of the little clues I've seen on territorial concessions, what does the American public need to know about supporting Ukraine? Because I think we've got to keep sending them the wherewithal to continue to fight.
You, the American people, should understand that Ukraine winning, and we don't talk about winning enough, and winning isn't just about geography and where the lines get drawn. The perception that Vladimir Putin's aggression, killing Ukrainian kids, hurts America, or that perception that he wins from killing Ukrainian kids hurts America. It makes our life more difficult. It means that the Iranians, the Venezuelans, we're now down in the Caribbean trying to oust Maduro. I think that's all to the good. They're all working together and watching how the United States responds when aggression is foisted upon innocent people. And so for America, it matters an awful lot that Ukraine gets an outcome that guarantees their political stability, their sovereign integrity, and their security for decades to come. That's how President Trump delivered deterrence in his first term against Vladimir Putin, which we successfully did. And it's how we can restore deterrence again. And if you're the mother of a young child who's headed to the Marine recruiter station today, you need Ukraine to be successful in demonstrating Western civilization's resolve to push back against these tyrants like Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping.
Before I move to Venezuela, I want to stop in a country that's very near and dear to both of our hearts, which is Israel. I remember the documentary you made with former ambassador to Israel, David Friedman. They've had a very difficult 2 years. They, of course, the slaughter on 10/7, followed by military victory after military victory. But here we are 2 years and a month later, and Hamas is not defeated, and Hezbollah looks like they're trying to come back. How do you assess the situation in the Middle East, Mr. Secretary?
Just as we're not going to persuade Vladimir Putin to be decent, Hamas is a resistance movement sponsored from Tehran. They are not going to lay down their weapons. They're going to have to be coerced and killed. And to date, no one else has signed up to do that except the Israeli Defense Forces. And so I suspect you will continue to see Israel do the necessary. We saw the strike against Hezbollah's leader in the outskirts of Beirut just this past week. We've seen the efforts that they have made in Yemen to go after Houthi leaders. The Israelis understand that October 7th wasn't an aberration. It wasn't just that Hamas lost its mind for a moment. It was a concerted effort on the part of the Iranian leadership to use its terror proxies to change the conditions on the ground in the Gulf Arab states and broadly in the Middle East. So I'm hopeful an international security force will come in, but it's going to have to be prepared to do the hard work of continuing to disarm Hamas and destroy the remaining tunnels. I suspect that the only organization actually prepared to do that is the Israeli government, and they need to complete that task to keep Israel safe, and of course also to convince the Gulf Arab states that we are serious. The United States is serious about pushing back against Iran in ways that will convince them to continue to build out on what became the Abraham Accords. That's really important to us here in America.
Now, you oversaw the Abraham Accords along with President Trump and the whole team there at the White House getting it done in the first term. Saudi Arabia was here last week screwing up traffic, as you well know. But if it was to get them onto the Abraham Accords, I'd be all okay with that. But one of the things I picked up is that there might be a split between MBS and MBZ. Is that, in fact, your understanding, and does that complicate the Abraham Accords for us?
You know, Hugh, it's always a complicated region. Every one of those nations protecting its own interests, and they do vary slightly. My sense, however, is that the course for continued progression of what became the Abraham Accords, where there were many hands, not just mine, but Mr. Kushner, Ambassador Friedman, President Trump, Prime Minister Netanyahu, and frankly, MBZ and MBS as well. I think the trajectory there is set. The timeline, more difficult to predict. But I would guess that 5 years from now, there will be many more nations that recognize the fundamental right of Israel to exist, not only in the Gulf, but think of the big Muslim populations in Malaysia, Indonesia, Pakistan. I think they too see the folly of their ways. And I think over time, they will come to do the necessary, which is to create a secure, prosperous Middle East, which isolates Iran and brings Israel into that security architecture.
In that architecture, where does Turkey under Erdogan? He's not immortal. All these people are going to pass from the scene, but I don't know what he's doing to Turkey, whether or not it's going to be able to be brought back into the core central of NATO. What's your concern there?
You know, I've watched Turkey. I've always hoped for the best, but my observation is that they have proved nettlesome to Israeli security, nettlesome to the American outlook as well. I hope President Erdogan will see that it's in his best interest to build out his NATO role, and he will begin to look more towards Europe than to the traditions that often have created extremism in the region. It was a very difficult set of relationships during my time. You know, my counterpart when I was the CIA director was a fellow named Hakan Fidan. He's now their foreign minister. He's someone that I think understands this, and I'm hopeful that Turkey can be brought to a place where it is accretive to the very propositions we were just speaking about, and not trying to undermine the peace progress that has been made. That's especially important in Syria. You know, the person who's now leading Syria was someone who we were trying to kill during the Trump's first administration.
Right.
We need to watch this closely. If he's turned a new leaf and he's prepared to try and bring Syria together, an incredibly difficult domestic proposition for Syria, if he's determined to do that and he is focused on that, he can help shape what this looks like. And that means Turkey will have a more logical place for it to find security for itself, and the region can begin to unite in ways that will deliver really good outcomes for the United States.
All right, Mr. Secretary, I want to conclude with the tour of the globe with our hemisphere. When you left office, I'm not sure that Chile and Argentina were on our side, but Brazil might have been. Now that's flipped. Nicaragua remains a problem, but the key bad guy is still Maduro and his backers in Cuba. What do you make of that armada we have down there? What do we use it for?
You know, it is quite something to see the change. I'd add Colombia as another nation that's flipped, and this one against us as well. They were good partners during my time on counter-narcotics efforts. That's no longer the case, I sadly have to say. Look, you don't often take an armada of that scale there unless you have a real goal. President Trump hasn't said clearly yet exactly what the objective is. I'm actually, for the moment, fine with that, so long as we're doing the hard work privately. But we tried during the first term to give the Venezuelan people a real opportunity. And that means, of course, Maduro, the Cubans, the Russians that are there in Venezuela have to decide it's not worth the candle anymore. I am very hopeful President Trump will continue, and Secretary Rubio will continue to put pressure on the regime that gives the Venezuelan leadership there an opportunity to flip the script and bring Venezuela back to where, you know, I was talking to my son the other day. He doesn't remember Venezuela as the powerful economic force that it was. It wasn't that long ago, Hugh. It is possible to get it back there. It's going to take an enormous amount of pressure from the United States. I don't think for a moment that we put a carrier the size of the Ford down there if we didn't have an objective that went beyond just practicing our seamanship in the Caribbean.
Yeah, it ought to be the richest country in the hemisphere other than the United States, and Mexico the same way, given their natural resources. Let me close by asking you about the Department of Defense in a big picture kind of way. There are new companies emerging like Palantir and Anduril, and I'm not sure what your relationships are with any or all of them, and I'm not asking for that reason. Do you think we are on the edge of a transformative period of defense acquisition where the weapons of war change rather quickly and we're no longer a carrier dependent country? And I like my carriers, don't get me wrong, but it does seem to me like the hypersonic, the missile age has arrived upon us, and
Yeah.
a lot of things that we used to count on don't matter that much anymore.
Hugh, that's a great question. As a former Army tanker, I like my M1 tanks too, just like the
Ha!
carriers. They may have seen their best days. They're not unimportant. We still need them. But your point about how we think about conflict and war has fundamentally shifted. I have a horse in the race. I'm trying to help a bunch of folks who are trying to become the next agile folks who can provide those things. So I have a commercial interest in that. But I do think the Department of War is on the cusp of making this transition. I worked with Boeing, I worked with Lockheed, I worked with Northrop and Raytheon, all of them, but they are not nimble beasts. And the conflict today requires nimble beasts. And we have the innovation, creativity, human capital, and actual capital to deliver that like no one else in the world. I'm confident that Steve Feinberg, who's now got the acquisition ball in his hands at the Department of Defense, who came out of the private sector, can begin to flip this in a way that we can be sure that when there is a conflict, a serious conflict, that the United States has the tools of modern warfare. Think you're right about space, you're right about hypersonics. Think also cyber and counter UAS and the ability to do jamming and counter jamming. All of those things, which we didn't even think about 25 years ago, they're now happening real time, and the iterations must be able to happen that way as well. We need a Department of War that can procure those weapons off the shelf, real time, and deliver them for our soldiers and sailors in a way that can save lives and deter our adversaries. I'm really hopeful that we will turn the corner there.
Last question, Mr. Secretary. Almost a decade ago, you gave me an interview out at Langley when you were running the CIA, and I asked you a question whether or not you were confident that we could keep up in the cyber espionage game, that every time China hit us, we could hit them hard. And you gave me a very spy-like answer. You winked and you nodded, and you didn't say anything. Are you still confident that we're staying abreast or ahead in those domains?
You know what's great here? Now that I'm out of government, you can get Mike Pompeo unplugged. So all to the good. Yeah, I'm still confident that we can. We certainly have the capability. What I worry more about is the policy. I'm not sure that we still have our counter cyber policy in the right place to achieve deterrence. We wouldn't necessarily see it, but I am hopeful when they are striking, we are responding back. We are saying that was actually us who did that. We can do it again, and we can do it 100x that. So stop screwing around with our internal cyber capabilities and our capacity to live our lives here in the United States. And if we don't do that, if we just allow them to take over the colonial pipeline as they did in the first year of the Biden administration, or conduct operations against us, and we just say, that's over, we got through it, we will see this continue to spike. And it's not just big nation states, it's rogue actors too. We have the capability to solve it. We have the capability to deter. We simply need a policy that can deliver that very deterrence.
On that note, a very good Thanksgiving to you, and thank you for joining me on this Thanksgiving week, Mr. Secretary. Always good to see you.
Thank you. Have a great Thanksgiving with you and for you and your family too. So long.